Last week, I brought you coverage of the Kinder Morgan protests in Burnaby. And as you saw, there was a couple activists who tried to shut down my presence there. They wouldn't let me ask questions. They tried to block my cameraman. Click here for the link to see that. Now, at the end of my report, I told you about some very good news. In fact, there was a small counter-protest out on the water. I couldn't see it from land, but when I got home from the protest, I saw some of the photos on Twitter, and I knew I had to interview one of these guys. So over the long weekend, I caught up with one of them and asked them just what they were thinking and why they wanted to get out there and have their voices heard. All right, I'm here on location with Leland Lloyd at Cates Park, and we're right actually across the water from the Kinder Morgan Westridge facility, where this young man decided to launch a counter-protest last Saturday. So Leland, tell me a little bit about what inspired you to get out there on the water and get your message out.
Well, I have a good friend who told me he wanted to sort of put together what he called the Freedom Navy, and it was originally going to try to get as many ships as he could out. He knew that I had a boat with my family, and we're all fairly conservative family, so we brought our boat out, and I also tried to get a hold of a few others. Went out there, though, and the whole idea is that we wanted to send our message that, yeah, you can protest the actual oil tanker itself and oil coming in, but we can also protest your protest, or at least we can make our voice heard. And that
show your support.
Reasons, yeah. We can show why it is that there is actually some good reasons for why we might want to support Canadian domestic oil as opposed to relying on foreign oil overseas.
Sure, go ahead and explain kind of why you want to support this project.
Well, one of our signs actually was Pipelines for Peace, and the whole premise behind that is that I like the idea of being able to have access to more trade in overseas markets. I like the idea of even being able to, instead of being forced to sell most of our oil to the United States and being locked up there, I want us to be able to send it over to China, send it over to different markets in Asia, India, so that way we can ultimately have better relationships with them through trade, and through better relationships, reduce future conflict of any kind.
I think that's a great point, because it's, you know, one of the things that I think the protesters forget to remember is that they basically don't realize that even if they shut down Canadian oil exports, these places around the world are simply going to buy their oil elsewhere. So it's not exactly as if they are truly, you know, reducing the amount of oil used around the world, is it?
Yeah, actually, one of our signs also said "No more Saudi blood oil," and that caught a lot of protesters by surprise, because they thought, oh, well, we agree with that. Well, of course, because the idea is if we don't have to rely on foreign oil, especially Saudi Arabian oil, which has its own monarchy and its own really aggressive government, we don't have to be in their pocket in a sense. If we can rely on domestic Canadian oil, we can actually support ourselves and have a stronger say over those other countries that we previously were being reliant on.
Yeah, absolutely, especially in Eastern Canada. A lot of these protesters don't even realize that we're still very reliant on oil from countries like Saudi Arabia in Eastern Canada. So one other thing is, I've noticed this. I've been going to protests for quite a while. In fact, actually how I got my start really in this business was actually doing a counter-protest about 2 years ago at a different location, much like you guys did. But one thing I've noticed in going to protests and talking to people is that they're actually very ethnically monolithic. It seems like there's a lot of older white people there, and that's what I noticed on land. What did you guys notice on as far as like the makeup of the kayakers? Was it a very good representation of the diversity of Vancouver, or was it the typical kind of older white people with maybe a little too much liberal guilt?
Now that you mention it, that is very true. Yeah, mostly, especially when I saw the Sea Shepherd boats and the Greenpeace boats that came up to us and told us to make sure we were careful around the kayakers. When I remember looking back at the kayakers, I didn't even think of that before, but yeah, it was mostly the kind of people you'd typically see growing up in North Vancouver or West Vancouver in the end.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, so that's Leland Lloyd. We're live right here at Cates Park, right across from the Kinder Morgan Westridge facility. And for the Rebel.media, I'm Christopher Wilson. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Click here to never miss a Rebel update. Want even more of the Rebel? Well, click here to become a premium member.